I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will argue that traditional communities are backward and need modern city values. But look at the Badui people. For hundreds of years, they live with a zero crime, zero homelessness, and in perfect harmony with nature, which simply because they protect their traditions. We should not measure success by big buildings or money, but by how we safe and happy a community is. To progress should never demand that people destroy their own identity and soul just to fit into the modern world. So as the government team, we define these motions that reverse to a conditions which element that more valuable that should be prioritized when it collapses. It means to keeping traditional way of life or chasing modern social development. Motions, this house would prioritize preserving cultural traditions even at the cost of slowing social progress. In this current time, in the small province of Banten, there is a unique ethnic group that still strengthen the traditional culture named Suku Baduy, especially in Baduy Dalam. They would avoid modernization such as rejecting of formal school for the sake of traditional education. They do not use any tools of technology and the highest decision to choose civilizations in Pu'un hands. Pu'un means traditional elders in Baduy ethnicity. Their land is collective that cannot be traded. When the government trying to inputting internet network or formal school to speed up social progress, Baduy society with firm surely reject and preserve traditional culture instead. There are proof if without modernizations, they success protect the nature, environment, and social harmony in centuries. So we so I got several stakeholders that influencing in this motion. So first, it's the local government. They tried to force put the technology there in Baduy land. Meanwhile, the Baduy society feels like it is a necessary thing to have and would damage the environment. So the second one is Baduy society itself, which there being a form of preserving ancestral culture that should be preserved until forever. So let me start away to the goal. Our goal is to continue to preserve what has been hereditary throughout, including to protecting Ruma Adat land, it means collective land, then to internship culture mandatory as a form to avoid loss of local identity. As the first speaker, I would like to focusing my argument in brain drain topic and exploitative capitalistic that I will explain in my argument after this. So I shared my argument into two sections as I said previous. So first, it's a collective land as an existential fortress and protections from capitalist exploitations. That we should prioritizing collective system land system lands that called ulayat in Sundanese and prohibiting individual property rights is the only way to guarantee the survival and sovereignty of indigenous communities against cultural poverty. Because when social reformers push the individual land ownership, they argue for economic efficiency, which is land can be collateralized, sold, or used as a liquid capital. However, the worst scenario that opposition teams will fail to understand the inherent vulnerability of indigenous peoples. Without the same mainstream financial literacy as urbanities, individual property rights become a dangerous trap. Large corporations or predatory land speculators and can easily manipulate, bribe, or intimidate vulnerable individuals into selling their specific plots of short-term cash. Once collective land is fragmented and sold piece by piece, the community loses its geographical sanctuary. They will be displaced from their ancestral home. They lose their traditional agricultural livelihoods and it inevitably end up as impoverished marginalized laborers in urban slums because they have been stripped of their economic roots. For example, we can see the undeniable success of the inner Baduy, means Baduy Dalam, community in Indonesia, they strictly prohibit individual land certification and forbid any land sales uh, to others, to outsiders. As a result, while many other indigenous group globally have lost their ancestral rainforest to palm oil or mining concessions, after their lands were privatized, the Badu people have maintained absolute food sovereignty, zero homelessness, and pristine forest preservation collect as the form of collective ownership acts as their ultimate social safety net. Therefore, slowing down the social progress of land privatization is entirely justified to protect the most fundamental human right of these people. It means the right to access and remain sovereign over their own land. Let me start away to my second argument. It's a mandatory as a shield against brain drain and cultural extinctions. Mandating a one-year cultural for the youth before they can leave the city as is a legitimate limitation of individual autonomy to prevent or to avoid the irreversible loss of a civilization's identity. The worst scenario of this motion, the opposition team will criticize this mandate as an oppressive restriction on youth freedom. However, absolute individual freedom without cultural root leads to an identity crisis. Globalization and urban modernization possess an aggressively assimilative power. If young people are allowed to migrate to mainstream cities without a cultural baselines, they will experience total cultural dissociations. They will forget their mother tongue, lose traditional ecological farming techniques, then also abandon indigenous dispute resolution mechanism. In the long term, this creates a catastrophic cultural brain drain. When the elders pass away, no younger generation will be equipped to govern the village, resulting in the literal death of a centuries-old culture. In so for the example, in the Baduy Luar community, even though the youth are now allowed to interact with the modern world and run online business, there are still strictly bound by core traditional obligations. They must participate in annual Seba ritual, a traditional privilege to meet regional leaders and prevent and present crops, this internalized process ensures that even when Badu youths use smartphones to sell local craft, they always return home and divert to traditional authority, keeping their community robust and intact. And with that, slowing down rapid integration into mainstream school and urban jobs for a single year of cultural grounding is a teeny price to pay to prevent the permanent extinction of an irreplaceable human heritage. So, ladies and gentlemen, at the time of the day, modern progress can always wait and be achieved slowly later on. But once a unique culture, language, and way of life are destroyed by modern world, they are gone forever.